Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, August 23rd, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. The corporate media is contentizing everybody with the guilty verdict in the Fort Hood shooting case, which was actually a study in foregone conclusions because the guy didn't even mount a defense. It was a given. You know, the kangaroo hopped into the court. They got the verdict that they wanted. It's plastered all over the media. But there's a lot of other stuff going on that we're going to be focusing on for the balance of the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room twiddling the dials, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. The lovely Lady Claire will not be in our third hour today, but she will be returning to the microphone a week from today. On August 30th, so for those of you who've been writing and saying, we miss her, I miss her too, and she's going to be back here next week. All right, obviously the real hot story going on is the impending war in Syria, and as I was saying yesterday, it does appear that the government is going to put out this clumsy lie about a chemical weapons attack, and they don't care if you believe it or not. They're going to grab your kids and send them over to make war on Syria, because how dare those Syrian people sell their oil for currencies other than the dollar? How dare they even consider running their economy without a private central bank? Apparently, in an interview with CNN, Obama is out there saying he's nearing a key decision on Syria. Well, the decision's already been made because, according to Le Figaro, U.S.-trained and supported forces are already inside Syria. They crossed the border on the 17th, 3 days before this obvious false flag chemical attack, to try and justify all that stuff. And they're trying to make it look like Obama is still deciding, and he's talking about he's going to have to go up to the United Nations. I can't do this without the United Nations. He's going to try and wrap this latest war of conquest in some kind of ersatz legitimacy by saying, oh, the United Nations said we had to go do this. I'll bet you that'll get Samantha Power back from vacation. Big scandal there, you know. After she got done screaming about this Swiss diplomat who dared criticize Israel, she went off on vacation. She missed the Emergency Security Council meeting on Syria. Just was complete no-show. Complete no-show. They'll get her back for this one, though. So we're seeing, you know, CNN is out there with the Obama interview. New York Times front page, Obama officials weigh response to Syrian assault. They're rushing this thing through. They understand that cover story is just complete nonsense, and so all the Western powers who are slave to private central banks are getting ready to go after another nation. The French foreign minister is threatening force in Syria if the United Nations Security Council fails to act. You must go there and smash the people we think need to be smashed yet. Great Britain has already declared by imperial edict the Assad regime is responsible for that recent chemical attack in Damascus. They're absolutely we don't need any evidence any more than we needed evidence of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons. We just know because we stared into our crystal ball, or probably more likely into the bottom of an empty bottle of scotch. And we know he did it, and we're going to move on that absolute act of faith there. And remember, two things I want you to think about as you hear all this stuff going on. Why would Assad carry out a chemical attack on the very day the UN chemical weapons inspectors Assad himself invited to Syria arrive and carry out the attack only a few miles from where they were staying, so they just rush right over? And if Assad carried out the chemical attack, if he was really that stupid, and all of the government's online shills are saying, oh yeah, he's that stupid, he would do that. Yeah, he's an idiot. We don't know how he ever got in charge of Syria. He's just a complete moron, and yes, he's stupid enough to carry out a chemical attack on Syrian civilians while the UN chemical weapons team is still unpacking. But if Assad were going to do that, why were civilians and women and children targeted? Wouldn't Assad, if he was going to take the chance of using a chemical weapon, use it against the hired mercenary troops? Think, people, think. It makes the government nervous. Women and children were targeted for the emotional shock value of those videos, some of which we now know were actually up on the internet before the officially declared time of the chemical attack. It's all stage managed. Le Figaro is reporting U.S.-trained and supported forces are already entering Syria and crossed the border on the 17th, 3 days before the chemical attack. This is all being orchestrated. And for those of you listening to this show, and if I sound angry, it's because I am, knowing how we were lied to about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, knowing how we were lied to about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, about Spanish mines in Havana Harbor, about Pearl Harbor being a surprise, if you do not stand up and start screaming in every direction that this latest war is based again on a lie, if you do not oppose this latest war, then the blood of all those young Americans who will die in this coming conflict stains your hands. You can't pretend to be a bystander or impartial or non-involved any longer. This government has a history of lies, frauds, and deceptions, and this one isn't even clever. Saddam's nukes was somewhat plausible, but this idea that Assad was dumb enough to carry out a chemical weapons attack on civilians while the UN chemical weapons team was there and targeted women and children instead of the enemy forces trying to bring him down, it just completely defies any common sense and logic. It just does. It's not a clever lie, but the U.S. policy is we need to invade, put out a convenient lie, and we'll just invade. And if you're a loyal American, you will believe the bullpucky that we're shoveling out here, because if you refuse to believe the U.S. government lies, the terrorist will win. Yes, the chemical weapon attack hit women and children. Why? For shock value, to get you upset so you disconnect your brain and just go along with the propaganda. Even if you're willing to accept on faith that Assad was dumb enough to use a chemical weapon, while the UN chemical weapons inspectors were there, why would he not have targeted those armed, hired mercenaries trying to remove him from power? How does it benefit Assad to target women and children a couple of miles away from the UN chemical weapons team? It doesn't get more obvious than this, that it's a false flag. And so, all these governments, France, Great Britain, the United States, they're all drooling over their share of the prize of Syria, and they're all ready to get that final stepping stone for the war against Iran, because we've got to force the world back onto private central banking, no matter how many millions die. And the lies aren't even clever. Anybody who just stops and thinks about, you don't have to be highly intelligent to realize this story is complete nonsense. Now, over in the Jerusalem Post, they had a very interesting headline, U.S. now facing a more abbreviated time frame on decision for Syria, which is a very polite way of saying that the U.S. government is realizing nobody is believing any of this nonsense about Assad and chemical weapons. Remember, back in January, there were emails that were leaked from a British defense firm, Britam, that said there is a plan to give chemical weapons to the hired mercenaries to use on civilians, for which Assad will be framed so we can invade. It's right out in the open what they're doing. So that's what they mean by abbreviated time frame. They're going to give this thing the bum's rush. They want to be in there before the Labor Day holiday. They're probably going to do most of the bombing while you're out there with your hot dogs and beer and barbecue and the rest of that. Australian military planners are in Washington, D.C., working on the Syrian war plan. It's on. It's on. And as usual, you are being fed a big steaming pile of USDA choice bovine excrement to try and get you to go along with it. And I don't believe it. I don't think you're believing it. And the government doesn't really care. They're going to come and take your kids and throw them into another war for the bankers. And they don't care how many of them die. Because those bankers will gladly send have historically sent hundreds of millions of human beings to death and disfigurement just to make a fast buck. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm trying to get my temper under control because I do have a bad temper and I do work to keep it under rein. But I have come to understand that you reach a point where trying to be objective and analytical really doesn't work anymore. When you see something that is so morally, ethically, historically wrong, you have to take a stand and say, yeah, this is wrong. And right now, I have never been more disgusted and ashamed to be an American than I am right now, watching this obvious nonsense story being foisted by the corporate media and bolstered by the warmongers to justify another invasion of another country that has not done anything to the United States of America other than to defy the economic powers in this country. I mean, let's get real about this. Only the hired mercenaries, only the warmongers benefited from this chemical attack. Look at it from Assad's point of view. What does it get him? What does it accomplish that helps Assad and Syria? And the answer is absolutely nothing. This thing from start to end is all about trying to support the war agenda. Oh, he's gassing women and children. How terrible. Why? Why would he do that? If he was stupid enough, when he's on the verge of, you know, getting rid of the hired mercenaries with conventional arms, he doesn't need to use chemical weapons. Why would he use them when that UN chemical weapons team that he invited finally shows up? Why would he target women and children? And the answer is he wouldn't. This is all ginned up by the hired mercenaries supported by Israel and the United States to create a new war agenda. That's why they targeted women and children, for the emotional shock value. Like that stupid story about how the Iraqis were stealing incubators out of the Kuwait hospitals that turned out to be a complete fiction created by Hill and Knowlton. This is obviously another war-starting lie. And we know it's a lie even before the war gets going. We're going to take a phone call here. Paul in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. It's a sad day in America when you realize that we are the axis of evil. This is so demonic that we have to travel so far, across the whole ocean, you know, and even beyond that, than the Mediterranean Sea, to even meddle in these foreign affairs so far away. And oddly, at the same time, when we hear about how much oil is produced in the United States that they boast about now. Well, you know, the oil that we're still paying $3.50 a gallon for the gasoline from which it derives.
Okay, you need to understand something very important here. It is not merely having access to the oil, because those oil nations will gladly sell the oil to the United States. The issue is what currency they are selling the oil for, because after Nixon ended gold convertibility of the U.S. dollar and the dollar plunged, they propped the dollar up with the petrodollar deal. They went to all the world's oil-producing nations and said, if you agree to only sell your oil for dollars, we will militarily protect you from people who might want to come and invade you, like Israel, and you can take those U.S. dollars that are pouring into your coffers and you can invest them in the United States in real estate and treasuries and so forth and so on. And that was what propped up the value of the dollar after Nixon ended gold convertibility. So the issue isn't access to the oil, it's what the oil is sold for. 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, the U.S. invades, lynches Saddam Hussein. Iraq's oil is back on the world market, but only for U.S. dollars. Muammar Gaddafi, in addition to setting up his state central bank and the gold dinar, declared that Libya's oil would only be for sale for the gold dinar. Invade Libya, kill Gaddafi, Libya's oil back on the market, but only for the U.S. dollar. The U.S. is propping up its economy. They're backing the dollar with oil, other people's oil. And they're trying to enforce that deal, they're reimpose that deal, because more and more nations are selling their natural resources for currencies other than the dollar. That's why they hated Hugo Chavez. He was selling Venezuela's oil to China for the yuan. And that's what these wars are all about, propping up the dollar. And they don't care how many of your kids are going to die to try and accomplish that goal.
Well, I think for many out there it has to do with just securing or seeming to secure Israel to make the Israelis feel comfortable. And by the way, this is a policy that nobody will even sign a document to enunciate it. There's no PNAC document for this new anarchic policy because they know the result is just mass murder and slaughterhouses. They did it to Iraq. They turned that into a slaughterhouse. Now they're turning Syria into a slaughterhouse. And guess what, Michael? This is what they want.
Of course that's what they want. They want the nations in turmoil because it's easier to control them that way. And as far as Israel's concerned, if they don't feel secure being the only nuclear power in the Middle East, there's nothing that will make them secure. They are, as a national character, permanently paranoid. And catering to that paranoia is not going to solve the problem.
And they don't want functional nations like Syria and Iraq, which are nationalistic. They want them divided up and slaughtering each other, and that's what they're getting.
That's exactly right. You're exactly right.
There will be no museum built for them. There's no Holocaust museum for these people, for this instigated, just turning these states into slaughterhouses and dysfunctional dystopias. It's such a disgrace, Michael. Thank goodness for you out there ringing the moral clarion call of just the wrongness of it, just somebody in the media discussing this instead of covering it all up and trying to exacerbate it and make it into an even further genocide or to continue this mass slaughter. It's a disgrace.
It is a disgrace, but as I mentioned before, and it's also in my All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, historically, these money junkie private bankers have not hesitated to send hundreds of millions of human beings to horrible death and disfigurement. From their point of view, it's just business. They will gladly, in this new World War, World War III, we're already into it right now, they will gladly see a quarter of the world's population go up in flaming death as long as the surviving three-quarters of the population remain enslaved to their little money junkie Ponzi banking scheme system.
Yeah, and it's going on right in front of our eyes in Syria. And no, it's not a big deal in the media, not our media, Michael, their media. And so we were kept in the dark about it. And the people who root for this policy and put out this policy, they won't sign it because they know it's going to lead to a bloodbath. And yet it continues, and it is the policy of spreading anarchy and destruction in the Middle East. And it's disgraceful. There's no reason.
And it's not just going to be the Middle East. I mean, the U.S. is already casting covetous eyes across Africa and South America. Any place with natural resources to sell is on the list to be conquered so that those natural resources are purchased only using U.S. dollars. And the problem with that agenda is it's an all-or-nothing deal. If the U.S. conquers only half the world and says you have to come through the dollar to buy anything from the lands we've conquered, the rest of the world will just trade among themselves and buy their natural resources back and forth directly because they don't want to pay that huge uplift by going through the U.S. dollar. And so, and yeah, like BRICS, and like China's already signed direct currency swap deals with 8 different nations. And so this policy the U.S. is clearly following right now literally cannot succeed unless they conquer the entire world. And that means that's the reason we're seeing all this China bashing and Russia bashing. The U.S. government actually thinks they can fight and win wars against Russia and China. They are insane. And, of course, they understand it might not work out. They've been building all these underground bunkers for decades now, built at taxpayer expense for them. You will not be allowed into it. You paid for it, but you will be stopped at the door. It's a very exclusive club.
Our employees built that, right? Our employees built that. Our employees are doing all this.
All right. Listen, we got to take a break for commercials. I got to try and calm down, and I will be right back. We got more callers on the line. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are lighting up. I guess I'm not the only person having a hard time maintaining an even strain over the obviousness of this lie used to sell America yet another war for our children to die in. Horrible death and disfigurement. Just for these stupid little pieces of ink and paper. That's what this is all about. Forcing the world to bow to this particular piece of paper with ink on it. That's all it's about. Syria has done nothing to the United States of America. And until we get the United States of America back to being a great nation, ruled by laws and governed by principles, we have no moral right to run around the world saying, oh, we're going to invade this country and make them live the way that we do and use the banking system that we do. It's complete nonsense. Going to go back to the phones here. George in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
How you doing, Mike? I'm pissed off just like you are. All I gotta say is more like, well, you got this chemical attack over in Syria. You better watch out for the sleight of hand at home, because I have a feeling while this crisis is going on, President Obama is going to sign the UN Small Arms Trade Treaty.
Well, remember, The treaty does not become the law of the land until Congress ratifies it, which they might do. My concern is going to be, having already committed to the invasion of Syria, that, you know, at least on the 17th is when the plan launched. Now we know why Kerry was going back and forth to Israel 5 times to get this thing going. But if the American public don't buy into this Assad gassing his own women and children while the UN inspectors were there, then I think we can expect some kind of another false flag to be blamed on Syria. So we need to keep our eyes alert for that.
Well, like I say, you got to look at key bono. Who stands to gain?
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, Assad stands to gain nothing gassing his own people. It's the U.S. government that stands to gain because they need another war because I see this U.S. government just about to ready to collapse, and the dollar to collapse with it.
Plus, Obama needs a bloody distraction away from IRS Gate, EPA Gate, DOJ Gate, TSA Gate, Benghazi Gate. He's in serious, serious trouble. The GOP in the House is openly talking about impeachment now, and nothing's going to distract the Congress and the American people than more blood and gore from the other side of planet Earth, except that the Americans are going to start realizing those are our own kids over there who are doing that. The idea that this is a clean war where we go in, do what we do, and come back and everybody's happy and healthy is complete nonsense. Even the people who survived the war zone are coming back traumatized, addicted to prescription antidepressants, exposed to toxic chemicals and depleted uranium that inflicts tremendous harm on the next generation. This thing is absolutely horrible, and the money junkies behind all of this, they don't care. They're hopelessly addicted to money, and just like any other addict, they are absolutely oblivious to the harm that their addiction causes those around them. That's where we are right now.
Well, I just hope, like any other addict, that they hit bottom themselves before they realize.
Well, the problem with that is they're not going to hit bottom until they have all the money and can't acquire anymore, and the whole thing falls apart. And in the process, they will have destroyed the entire nation. What we need is an intervention. We need to grab these money junkies and put them in some kind of a little hospital facility. We'll set up this little phony office with mahogany and brass and deep plush carpeting, and we'll have a little dollar bill sitting in the middle of the floor. And every time they bend over to pick up that dollar, we hit them with 30,000 volts, just like they used to get the smokers to quit smoking. But these people are mentally ill. They're addicts, and they are destroying our society around them with their addiction, and we need an intervention.
Well, Mike, I'll let you move on to the callers.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jimmy in Texas. Aloha, Jimmy. What's annoying you today?
Well,
Jimmy, you're on the air. Okay, I guess we lost Jimmy. Let's switch over to Scott in Wisconsin. Scott, are you there?
Michael, how you doing? Yeah, Michael, I remembered, it's all right to be angry. Michael, I remember talking to you probably about 6 years ago about this invocation of trying to get into Iran.
Yes.
And you probably remember that, frankly. I want people to understand what this means. We talked about this in the past, and this is serious stuff here, boys and girls. You want to play on the playground of Assad, America could get in the line of some nuclear missiles from Russia.
No. I absolutely disagree with that. Russia will not directly get into a war with the United States. What Russia has already stated to both Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Secretary of State John Kerry is that when the U.S. goes into Syria and or Iran, Russia will simply pour in supplies and money on the other side to turn it into a new Vietnam and grind the United States down in a war of attrition. And if you look at the relative economies of the United States versus Russia, Russia's going to do that. When the nuclear weapons start flying, it's going to be the United States that uses them, because remember, the United States is the only nation to actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction on another country. For all the talk about Iran and Iraq and all these other countries being nuclear threats, let's start with the one nation that's actually done it, and that is the United States.
Right, Michael, and I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is they're going to use Assad for the scapegoat to get into Iran.
Yes, they are.
And we talked about Iran, but we talked about this situation. But, brother, the bottom line is they have already been battling back and forth on the chess match that we talked to. They're at a desperate thing now.
Yes.
They're saying this chemical thing happened. And I'm telling you right now, the Russian top leader said, if you go into Iran, there's going to be full-bore complications. And if you go back to a couple weeks back, Michael, what was Putin do? He put all his military out in the water to stretch his muscle and say, boys and girls, I'm ready. I'm ready. Thanks for taking my call, Michael, but it's all right to be angry, and Americans better wake up and take heed. We're not going to be out of this situation over here, because if you toss saucers over there, you're definitely going to have saucers tossed back at you.
Yeah, there's no question about that one. Russia is trying to act like the adult in the room here. They are sending clear, unequivocal signs that they will not allow the U.S. to conquer any more of the world. And the U.S. government isn't listening. They're listening to Wall Street saying, we've got to get all those nations. We've got to get them all back on the dollar. We've got to bring back Bretton Woods, or it's all going to fall apart. And that's all they're listening to right now. And because the United States lacks the manufacturing, the manpower, and the men to win a prolonged conventional war, it is a guarantee that somewhere between now and final capitulation by the United States government, they will deploy nuclear weapons. And that, of course, will get everybody shooting. We are literally risking incineration of the surface of planet Earth over a piece of paper with ink on it. It's insane. It's got to stop here. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Mike. Hey, why can't we, the American people, get a big class action lawsuit and file it against? I mean, you can imagine 30, 40, 50,000 signatures on a lawsuit to go after these idiots.
Who signs the paycheck for the judges?
Well, that's just it. See, the whole system's corrupt.
That's exactly right. It is impossible to work within the system. We are past that point. I remember Claire Wolfe in her book, 101 Things to Do While Waiting for the Revolution, said we're at that awkward period in history. It's too late to work within the system and too soon to shoot the bastards. And then, of course, she came out later and said, I was wrong. It's time to shoot the bastards. And I'm not advocating that. But at this particular point, it is very, very clear that the financial governmental power, fascism, is acting like a fascist government, which is they're going to go on starting wars to try and solve the inherent imbalance in private central banking and kill millions and millions of people, all for the sake of black ink at the bottom of that ledger. When you set aside all the obvious lies about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and Iran's weapons of mass destruction, it all comes down to that religious faith that we must have black ink at the bottom of the ledger, no matter how much red blood we need to spill for it.
Yeah, well, I'm I am so mad to see this daily of innocent people being killed, knowing that your government openly supports this Al-Qaeda, that they pulled this 12-year hoax of war on terror and the so-called police state, taking all of our rights, everything like that, and it's all been a hoax. Every time you read the paper, or any news for that matter, it's the U.S. supporting Al-Qaeda, the Mujahideen, Muslim Brotherhood, the Taliban, and it's like, that's why they couldn't convict Manning like that on the aiding the enemy, because the United States is doing it.
Yeah, all right. Well, listen, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Keith. We'll be back with Jimmy, his phone call again after these words from America. Welcome back to the show. And before I go back to the phones, I'm watching the Fox News feed, and they're going on about all guilty verdicts in Fort Hood. The mayor of San Diego is going to resign over that whole sex scandal. Huffington Post will no longer accept anonymous comments on their articles. And, of course, Kim Kardashian's new baby. And I think what this tells us is that the government and the corporate media are already aware that this chemical weapons story isn't flying with the American people. Because of all the lies we have already heard, the majority of the American public are looking for reasons not to believe the official story, and they are certainly finding them now. And so to move this war policy along against what is shaping up to be overwhelming American popular opposition to another war, we need to be careful that they don't try and set off some chemical attack in the U.S. and said, oh, yes, it was Assad. He struck back at us. That earlier caller was right. They're desperate. They are in a panic. They're desperate to get the war agenda moving forward because they think that's going to solve the economic problems. And it won't, because the U.S. is going to lose this war. They have to be desperate. We here in the independent media knew and were reporting last January on this leaked email from this British defense firm, Britam, that said there is a plan approved by Washington to give chemical weapons to the hired mercenaries to use on civilians to blame on Assad. They knew we were already aware of this plan, and they were so desperate they went ahead with it anyway. The quality of thinking coming out of the White House is horrible. Either Obama is getting really bad advice from his advisors, or he's not listening to it, or they're all on SSRI antidepressants, which is an even more terrifying possibility. We know it was reported during Obama's first term he was suffering bouts of depression, for which the White House doctor would write him whatever. It's going to make him feel good and happy. And we know those medications, along with provoking violent impulses, cloud your thinking. All right, Jimmy in Texas, thank you for calling back. What's on your mind?
Hey, I didn't, all this.
Hello, Jimmy, are you there?
Can you hear me?
You keep cutting out. I think we probably, you know, the NSA, those little alligator clips they're using on your phone line are rusty, and because of austerity they couldn't buy new ones, and you keep cutting in and out. Try one more time.
Yeah, they keep cutting.
Yeah, you just went again. Jimmy, I'm sorry. We're going to have to let you go until you can afford to buy a new telephone here. All righty. Now, I saw a very interesting and bizarre piece of propaganda earlier today. This was over at The Guardian, which apparently still has some of their computers working after that visit to destroy the Snowden files. And the headline reads, "Only Assad can prove the toxic gas claims are false." Okay, and I'm going to read you a direct quote from the article. "If the alleged chemical weapon use in Syria is true, it would defy all logic. But the burden of proof now lies with Syria's president." This is one of the most bizarre comments to come out of the corporate media prostitutes I have ever heard. The writer of this article admits this whole chemical weapons story defies logic, but then they turn around and say it's up to Assad to prove he is innocent. Now, students of logic understand that you cannot prove a negative. So they're trying to basically put Assad in that position of having to prove a negative. But after that whopper they told us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, the burden of proof is on the United States to prove that chemical weapons were used and that they were used by Assad. Now remember, yesterday the Syrian media was reporting that Syria's forces had found the lab where the chemical weapons were created. And the chemicals involved suggest that chlorine gas, rather than sarin, was what was actually used. And some of the bags of caustic chemicals that were found there appear to have come from Saudi Arabia. So they're out there trying to say, we think you did it, prove that we're wrong. It's a classic propaganda tactic, and we know that is what it is. And what's really bizarre is, even within the text of the story, they're saying this whole claim that Assad used chemical weapons while the UN inspectors were there on women and children where none of the hired mercenaries got gassed. It doesn't make sense. It defies all logic. But we think he did it, and it's up to him to prove he didn't. That alone tells you this is just a fantastically orchestrated propaganda campaign. And remember, Le Figaro is reporting that U.S.-trained and supported forces crossed into Syria, primarily from Jordan. Some of them came across the Golan Heights on the 17th of August, 3 days before the chemical attack. How did these invading forces know that there was going to be this convenient chemical attack that would allow the world to turn a blind eye to this very obvious military invasion of Syria? Now, over at whatreallyhappened.com, I linked a flashback to an article I wrote all the way back in 2003 called The Lie of the Century, Fortunately, it was the last century. We're into a new century. We've got a new contest going for what's the biggest lie. And this chemical weapons story certainly is going to get probably the silver or the bronze. But remember how we were lied into the war in Iraq. He's got nuclear weapons. He could unload on Europe and the United States with 45 minutes warning. And they went in, smashed the place, put Iraq's oil back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar, lynched Saddam Hussein. They never found any weapons of mass destruction. There were no nukes. The only thing that they found, and they tried to put this up in the newspaper saying, see, we were right, they had chemical weapons, and it turned out to be leftovers of the chemical weapons given to Iraq by the United States to use on Iran. Now, something you need to understand about chemical and biological weapons. They have very short shelf lives. If you don't use them immediately, then you have to go through the process of destroying them because they're no longer effective. And what they found were these rusted out artillery shells that could carry chemical weapons. There were no chemical weapons inside. They couldn't even be fired through artillery because the outside was corroded and would destroy the gun bore. But they held them up and said, see, he had chemical weapons. But Saddam Hussein had in fact destroyed all of his chemical weapon stockpiles in compliance with the United Nations Security Council resolution. And the U.S. said, oh, weapons of mass destruction, we have to go invade. Well, you know that old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. The U.S. government actually thinks the American people are stupid enough to fall for the same lies again and again and again and again. And it is time for the American people to stand up and say, no. We are actually a lot smarter and more aware than you seem to feel that we are. And we know this story about chemical weapons in Syria against women and children somehow being Assad's doing is complete USDA choice bovine excrement. And I need you all to just go out on the net to your social media, to all the news stories, hit the comment sections and just say, yes, it's nonsense. It doesn't make sense. This is just another lie for another war for the bankers. And if we don't stand up and scream as loud as we can against it, more of our children will be killed and crippled to keep that bottom line on Wall Street's ledger black. They're using the red blood of our children to erase the red ink on Wall Street's ledgers. That's what's going on here. Now, speaking of Iraq, Obama's Department of Justice is now trying to lobby for George Bush, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and Paul Wolfowitz, to be granted procedural immunity in a coming lawsuit under international law for war crimes committed in the Iraq War, which basically means they're acknowledging they committed war crimes. Now they just want to evade the punishment. We'll be right back after Phyllis Schauffele. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, earlier in the week, there was a report that 4 bottle rockets, homemade firework-type rockets, were launched from inside Lebanon towards Israel. One apparently actually crossed the border and was intercepted by Iron Dome, supposedly. And the others basically fell harmlessly in empty ground, no injuries, so forth. Netanyahu immediately said, we will respond to this Lebanon's aggression. And again, why would Lebanon do something that would justify an Israeli invasion? Israel keeps invading Lebanon. They want that Litani River. They want that additional source of fresh water to green Israel up. Why would Lebanon do something like that? And again, if Lebanon was actually going to launch a rocket attack against Israel, wouldn't they aim those rockets at something important? Again, it's another one of these false flag provocations that Israel is historically famous for. And today we're getting reports Israel is attacking Lebanon. We're getting reports here from a so-called militant base being struck. And they're conducting airstrikes against Beirut. They're going to start another war and just step back and let Americans finish it for them. It seems to be a common pattern. to get America to fight wars against Israel's enemies. Now, you probably remember how John Kerry was over there in Israel and Palestine grandstanding, showboating about how the United States was going to be an honest and unbiased arbiter in the coming Israel-Palestine peace talks. And a lot of people said that he was making a lot of noise and really didn't seem able to accomplish anything because the U.S. government is completely under the control of Israel. Now we are getting word from antiwar.com that the U.S. mediators who were supposed to be taking part in the first portion of the Israel-Palestine talks were not allowed in by the Israelis. So it's just the Israelis and the Palestinians in a room with Israel coming out with its, you must recognize our right to exist, and the Palestinians say, okay, draw your borders, we'll recognize them, and Israel says, you filthy anti-Semites. And the U.S. mediators were not even allowed in. Amazing here. Now, getting on to the NSA scandal, because this is not going away, and everything that the British and American government is doing to try and contain this disaster is only making it worse. Like that ham-fisted Gestapo raid into the Guardian to smash computers. So apparently, and this was reported over at CBS's Washington affiliate, Obama came out and basically did a limited hangout that is setting a record for ludicrousness and stupidity. The official story now is that the NSA accidentally was copying the emails of some Americans. We didn't mean to do anything unconstitutional. It just happened by accident. Really, you know, those boys at the NSA, they were just trying to hack into the Girls Gone Wild website. And, well, you know how confusing those little IP addresses are. It's just numbers and periods. And, you know, they kept trying and typing to find the hot babes. And somehow the email of several million Americans wound up in their inbox. And really, that's all it was. It was just, it was an accident. That's the official story. That the NSA, after spending billions and billions of dollars to build a system to spy on Americans, only spies on Americans by accident. So it's not illegal and it's not unconstitutional because they didn't mean to do it. It just sort of kind of happened. That's the new official story from Obama himself. Now, if you walk into a bank and you do your business and you walk out of the bank and somehow a big stack of money wound up in your purse or briefcase and you really don't know how it got there, do you think they're going to listen to you about, hey, it just happened by accident before they throw you in prison? Of course they won't. The intention is not the crime. The crime is the crime. And the NSA spying system has acted illegally. Now we're getting word from the FISA court. They were lied to by the NSA. Congress was lied to by the NSA. The NSA is admitting, yeah, we kind of somewhat broke the privacy rules, and we're not even going to tell you the privacy rules we broke, but we're trying to get it under control. And they won't. The NSA provably feels itself above the law and above the Constitution. And if they will not respond to the authority regarding their activity, then we must take away the ability. And obviously Obama, for all his talking about tighter controls and greater transparency, remember when it was a week ago today, in fact, or was it 2 weeks ago today? I'm losing track of these things here, where he got up on TV and promised tighter controls and greater transparency on the NSA spying on Americans that only the previous Tuesday he had told Jay Leno did not exist. And so now for Obama to come out here with this ludicrous idea that, yeah, the NSA is spying on you, but it's all entirely by accident and you shouldn't be upset. Well, Mr. Obama, we are upset. Because it is very obvious you have no intention of actually getting this spy system under control. You're just trying to come up with something that you can say that will get Americans to go back to a false sense of privacy so that they'll just go on sending their emails and texts in the clear so that they can go on being spied on. That's what you're trying to do. These are all trial balloons. Tuesday on Jay Leno, there's no NSA spying. Friday, yeah, there's NSA spying, but we're going to get it under tighter control. And now we have this one, yeah, there's NSA spying, but it was entirely by accident. Obama is starting to remind me of the character Maxwell Smart on this comedy show Get Smart was one of Mel Brooks' first successes in TV. And there was this running gag in the show where Maxwell Smart would go out there and say, would you believe there's a crack troop of commandos surrounding this house at this very minute, ready to come in and rescue us? And the bad guy would say, no, I don't believe that. Maxwell Smart said, would you believe that there's 2 police officers and a police dog ready to come in and rescue us? And the bad guy would say, I don't believe that. Well, would you believe a Boy Scout with a flashlight? And it would just get sillier and sillier and sillier. And this is what Obama is doing. Would you believe there's no spying? No, we don't believe that. Well, would you believe we're getting it under control? No, we won't believe that either. Would you believe it was all by accident? No, we don't believe that either. From over at ex-Republic TV, declassified FISA court opinion shows NSA lied repeatedly to the court as well. The entire claim that the NSA activity against the American people is legal rests on the idea that the Foreign Intelligence Service Act court, emphasis on the word foreign, somehow made it legal and authorized it. They wrote new laws that said the NSA can do it. And by the way, courts cannot write laws. That is the function of the Constitution of the Congress. That is the function of the Congress as limited by the Constitution. Courts cannot write a law to make an unconstitutional action constitutional. And now we're hearing the FISA court saying they lied to us. They didn't tell us what they were really doing. They came in for a rubber stamp on this request to do X, and they went off and did Y. Pay no attention to that NSA spook behind the curtain over there. We have blood and gore in Syria to show you. Now, a very interesting situation is developing because over in Great Britain, The Independent published an article talking about Britain's secret internet monitoring station in the Middle East to intercept and process vast quantities of email, claiming that the information about this came from Snowden. And Snowden has gone public saying, no, that is not coming from me, and I don't know why The Independent is doing that. Well, I know why The Independent's doing it. The U.S. is desperate to discredit Snowden and all the information he's putting out. And this was proved a few weeks back with that heavy-handed attempt to plant stories on the net about how Snowden had files about captured UFOs at Area 51, and Snowden had files, and all this other nonsense. When we come back from this commercial break, I'll tell you why that relates to the story in The America, welcome back to the show. Let me finish up this story about what's going on with Edward Snowden. We saw this story in the Independent, claiming that based on Snowden's revelations, Britain had a secret internet monitoring station in the Middle East. And Snowden has come out and said, no, that information did not come from me. So what's going on? Well, we know the U.S. government is desperate to discredit Edward Snowden. A couple of weeks ago, they were trying it with these stories planted on the net about how Edward Snowden's files revealed the government had captured flying saucers out at Area 51, that Snowden had provided evidence of, well, I forget the rest of it. It was all nonsensical junk stuff. So I think what's going on here is their next step is to try and put out a plausible, believable story, such as there's an internet monitoring station in the Middle East run by Britain that can be easily disproved. It's another poisoning the well tactic. And a later story will say the internet monitoring station is located at, and they'll give the address, at which point the British media will go into that address with TV cameras and show it's something completely innocent and benign, like a bakery, and say, see, Snowden was obviously wrong here, and you shouldn't listen to any other revelations coming from him. And I think that's what they're trying to do here. And like I said, it's classic propaganda technique, poison the well, a little more subtle than that no plane at the Pentagon nonsense they've been shoveling at us as we come up on another 9/11 anniversary. But that, I think, is the reason for the Independent to pretend to be sourcing Edward Snowden's documents, especially since Snowden's sole media outlet up to this point has been The Guardian. So how is The Independent even supposed to be getting this information? We're going to go back to the phones. Brian in Georgia. Aloha, Brian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, about that poisoning the well, I wonder how long the federal government has known about this thing about Bradley Manning, you know, about this gender confusion. I guess they waited to release that so that, you know, any libertarians or paleocons that, you know, were supporting Bradley Manning are now going to look, you know, maybe look ridiculous. Oh, you know, you're you're all girly men or something like that.
Yeah, and talk about desperation on the cusp of madness, and they tried the same thing with Glenn Greenwald and David Miranda. Oh, they're gay. You shouldn't listen to what they have to say. They're gay. This from the same government that claims to be supporting, you know, they're bashing Russia over this law that says homosexuality cannot be taught in schools. Oh, bad Russia for repressing the gays. And then they turn right around, and you're absolutely right. They're putting out this thing about Bradley Manning's gender identity issues. Who cares? The story isn't Bradley Manning. The story is the evidence of U.S. war crimes he made public to the world. That's the story. Same thing with Glenn Greenwald and David Miranda. The story isn't their lifestyle. The story is this information about massive NSA spying on planet Earth. And we need to keep the focus on there. And they're dangling sex lifestyles and everything, trying to just take the focus off of what is really important. And remember, how Glenn Greenwald and David Miranda live their private lives does not affect you. What they revealed about the NSA spying does. That's how you keep your focus on what's important. With whatever's being fed out through the corporate media or even the independent media, just ask yourself, does this actually affect me personally? And if it isn't, then it's distraction and fluff and advertising.
Absolutely. One other thing, Mike, you were just talking about Congress making the laws. The courts, you know, obviously don't make laws. They're just supposed to rule on the laws, you know, in alignment with the Constitution. Something in my past years of paralegal research about the courts and the law, you know, we have since John Marshall, we have this principle of judicial review. And the way it was explained to me was like, yes, Congress makes laws, but Congress is full of politicians who, when they write these laws, they don't want to offend any voting blocks. So the laws that get passed are so hopelessly vague that it's almost like you have to sue and have a real judge that is grounded in the law look at it and tell what the law really means. So, yeah, the courts aren't supposed to make law, but sometimes the courts, someone with a legal background has got to look at these convoluted laws, bills that Congress passes, say this is what the law really means, you know, to like nail it down to something specific.
Yeah, but that is not relevant to what the Foreign Intelligence Service Act court has been doing. First of all, by definition, that court does not have jurisdiction inside the United States of America. And
it's not an Article III court. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The laws have to comply with the Constitution. The FISA court cannot write a law that allows the NSA to violate the Constitution. Period. End of discussion. And I understand that judges have a lot of leeway to interpret and redefine the laws. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But you're absolutely right. We have a permanent ruling class of lawyers where all they know how to do is write new laws. And that's why every time there's like a new Wall Street scandal, they say, we need a new law to make this better, forgetting that there are already lots of existing laws that simply were not being enforced. And it's a way of looking like they're solving the problem without actually trying to solve the problem, which would offend those people writing those big fat campaign checks.
Yeah, really, something like the FISA court, I equate that with tax court. They're basically star chambers that have the trappings of what appears to be a court, but they're just rubber stamps for, as you say, the ruling class.
Well, you're absolutely right about that, and especially with the idea of a tax court. Obviously, because they're funded from tax revenues, they've got a built-in conflict of interest, which is why tax court is never interested in hearing about whether the 16th Amendment was actually ratified or not. They're not interested in hearing about the Supreme Court decision, Stanton versus Baltic Mining, which said the 16th Amendment, even if ratified, didn't actually give Congress any new tax authority. Their job is to make the cash grab from the American people for the bankers look somehow quasi-legal to silence complaint and criticism. But it's a completely out of control, unconstitutional system from top to bottom. And the sooner it is gone, the more soundly the rest of the world is going to sleep at night, because we're hovering at the edge of a nuclear world war to prop up a piece of paper with colored ink on it.
Amen.
All righty. Well, thank you, Brian. We're going to let you go and switch over to Aaron in Texas. Aloha, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike. I just got a suggestion. You don't, I mean, in your previous shows, you have spoken about how the IAEA had been caught spying
Yes.
before?
Yes.
You don't maybe think maybe that the UN, they have some type of spies in the UN, they created chemical attack. Now let's go look at Assad's weapons and.
Oh, it's entirely possible that that UN chemical weapons team in Syria is already compromised and is prepared to say, oh yes, we're not really sure, but we think it may have been Assad. I mean, that's a very real possibility, because I don't think the people who sent those troops into Syria on the 17th and staged the chemical attack on the 20th are going to leave an obvious possible embarrassment like that, out of control. And so at this point, I'm pretty much assuming that that UN chemical weapons team has already been given their marching orders to go in there and say, oh yes, Assad did it.
So you think that after all the evidence of that Moscow is presenting and all the evidence that you presented yourself on the how they made the video a few moments later, all that, you don't think it's really going to matter?
No, I don't think so. I mean, remember when the IAEA was under the control of Mohammed al-Baradei, and they were very fair and objective both about Iraq and Iran, so they got Mohammed al-Baradei out of there, and they got this new guy in there, and this new guy ever since has always toed the line, yes, we think Iran has nuclear bombs, we can't find any evidence, but we're convinced they have it. And I would expect that this current UN chemical weapons team is basically made up of the same sorts of individuals. They are sent there to support the propaganda, not to find out the facts. If they had any inclination of finding out the actual facts, the U.S. would have vetoed sending them. We'll be back after these commercials. Thank you for the call, Aaron. Welcome back to the show here, and we've got a caller on the line, Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing? I wonder who you would back for president on the next election.
Ron Paul, same as I did the last two elections.
Who's that?
Ron Paul.
Right. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the phone call. Bye-bye. Now, I realize Ron Paul is not going to run again, but looking at the stable of people who are already here in 2013, they're already running for 2016, there's none of them I can support, because they're all money junkie, pro-Israel, let's send your kids off to more war yabos. We don't have anybody in the race that really looks to be good for the United States of America and the American people. And I'm getting sick and tired of voting for the lesser of two evils, because it's still evil, and it's a stupid way to run a country. It really, really is. Now, getting back to the NSA spying, down in New Zealand, apparently there's a growing scandal there where police affidavits are showing the New Zealand police, just ordinary police, have access to the USA's PRISM system to use in surveillance on ordinary people. It's not just the NSA using all this hardware. Now ordinary police departments have all of this stuff. Huge scandal down there. The New Zealand government responded by passing a law saying, yes, it's legal for NSA spying on the people of New Zealand. Now, New Zealand has been one of the nations all along that was part of this NSA echelon network. So they've been in on this thing right from the very, very start. Now, I want to talk about FBI Director Mueller, who is basically stepping down as head of the FBI. Apparently, he didn't have enough private secret files to get the job for life the way J. Edgar Hoover did. And he's come out there with this statement here that as we approach this new anniversary of 9/11, that he fears there will be a new 9/11 style attack on the United States. Watch out, they're coming to get you again. There's going to be a new 9/11. Which is a very bizarre thing for him to say, because as reported over at thehill.com, he's also saying that NSA surveillance could have prevented 9/11. If we'd only had access to this kind of information, we could have prevented 9/11. So if his warning about a new 9/11 actually happens, it undermines his comment that NSA surveillance is able to stop these acts of terror, and we've already proven with our NSA challenges that the NSA is not going to stop real terrorists. It's all about watching you. And in any event, we know all this NSA spying on us all certainly predates the Boston bombing. Why didn't you stop that one, Bob? I have 3 questions about 9/11, Mr. FBI. Israeli-owned internet messaging provider Odigo's New York office near the World Trade Centers received a text message warning them to get out of their building before the 9/11 planes had even left the runway. The manager of that office turned that message over to the FBI, including the IP the message was sent from. The FBI did nothing. They never followed up. They never identified the source, who clearly had advanced knowledge of the attacks of 9/11. Why didn't you follow up on that, Mr. FBI? Now remember the dancing Israelis, these Mossad agents who were using a moving company as a cover, and they were arrested after multiple witnesses saw them cheering and clapping and dancing as the World Trade Towers fell down. Why were they just sent back to Israel? Why were they not waterboarded to find out what they knew about 9/11, as so many Muslims were, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who confessed to being the mastermind after only 180 waterboardings? And finally, President George W. Bush sat in a school in Florida reading about pet goats on 9/11 and continued to sit and read after Bush himself states they knew the nation was under attack. Now, the official story is that an unknown number of planes were flying across the eastern part of the nation, crashing into buildings. Bush's presence at the school had been publicly announced in the media 3 days before, and there was an airport only 4 miles from that school. And yet the Secret Service protective detail just let Bush sit there reading about pet goats, waiting to make his speech. Very obviously, the Secret Service knew he was not a target, or they would have thrown him in that giant armored limousine and started driving in a random direction to foil a possible inbound. But they didn't. The dog did not bark. The Secret Service clearly knew Bush was not a target that day. And how could they know that unless they knew what the targets were going to be? Why isn't the FBI investigating this, Mr. Mueller? Just gets weird out there. But if they're starting to wag new 9/11, and it's possible, looking at the way the corporate media is just all busy with San Diego sex scandals and all the rest of that, it's very clear they have come to understand the American public isn't buying this chemical weapon story. And it was stupid and reckless for them to try. The only way they're going to get this Syrian war going again is they're going to need a new terror attack to blame on Assad, gassing a couple of American cities. Oh yes, it's Assad. We have evidence that Assad came in and did that. So they're sounding the warning. And again, because of all this NSA spying, if there are any more terror attacks in this country, they must be government false flags, or the NSA spying doesn't work against terrorists. Take your pick. And of course, they are not mutually exclusive. I think it is very obvious this NSA spying was never intended to find criminals or terrorists. It was about spying on you, the American people. And these terror attacks are all false flags. Interesting story out of newsforge.com. Federal officials are now declaring that anyone who speaks out against lie detector tests should be criminally investigated. Okay, now what they're trying to do is to target people who are giving lessons on how to defeat lie detector tests. And I don't think that's really going to work for 2 reasons. One, the very fact that you can be taught to defeat the polygraph shows how weak the polygraph really is. It's really just this analog system, and it's up to the guy operating it. There's no hard and fast science that says this person is lying, this person is telling the truth. They might just be under a huge amount of stress at the very idea that they're even being accused of a crime. It's all up to that operator to say, I think this squiggle means they're being deceptive. You need to go back to voice stress analyzers. I had a chance to actually see those being demonstrated back when I was still being friendly with the Pacific Institute for Advanced Research. They are far more accurate than polygraphs. And you don't have to strap somebody into a chair for one of those things. They don't even know they're being tested. Voice stress analyzers are being de-emphasized because the government is afraid people will start programming their own. It's actually very simple software to write, and they'll have that little laptop next to the TV set during campaign season and immediately know which candidates are lying or not. And we can't have the American people knowing when the government is lying. They used to sell these things in the sharper image. You can't actually buy these things anymore. The government doesn't want you knowing when they're lying. So, anyway, as I mentioned earlier in the show, a little bit of a kerfuffle being kicked up over the fact that Samantha Power, our brand new ambassador to the United Nations, seems to have gone AWOL on the job. Now, she was there long enough to bash that Swiss diplomat who criticized Israel, and then apparently she took off for a vacation. And she missed the UN Security Council emergency meeting on Syria. Well, Samantha can be counted on to be there when Israel needs her to be there, but when her employers, the American taxpayer, need her to be there, I'm on vacation. I was so exhausted after protecting Israel, I just had to take a break. Just had to take it. It's exhausting protecting Israel, which, yeah, these days it is. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Mayor Bob Filner has resigned as mayor of San Diego because of that whole sexual harassment thing. And by the way, I posted a link to some very funny Doonesbury cartoons about the sexual harassment problem in the military and how women who are being raped really don't have much that they can do about it. You've got to take a break for commercials. America, welcome back to the show. And no, you're not going deaf. We just had technical issues on that bump here. Getting back here to, let's talk about the economy. We're getting into the show here, and we need to talk about the economy here. If you are in possession of physical gold, you got to be feeling pretty good right now. Gold is surging. Physical gold, not the paper contracts. Gold has surged to a 9-week high on technical buying. There's another story that said it actually hit an 11-week high as the U.S. dollar index sinks. Now, we're getting some stories that the physical inventories of gold held by COMEX are dwindling down. Same thing with J.P. Morgan. They're trying to make good on the gold contracts coming in. They're starting to run out of gold. And at some point in the future, it is a given that the U.S. government will repeat what they did in 1933 and make it illegal for ordinary Americans to hold gold coins and gold bars. They'll grandfather the jewelry through because that would be very upsetting, I think, to American people. And by the way, you can go down to a lot of stores and you can now buy 24-karat gold jewelry, and it looks like junk, but the whole idea is it's 24-karat gold, melt weight value, that looks like jewelry, which, first of all, if you let your wife wear it, all kinds of fringe benefits are going to come from that, but it will be exempt in the event of gold confiscation. And you need to understand that the U.S. government has already been keeping records on large purchases of physical gold. So if you're going to be buying gold, small amounts only to stay under the radar, go to Republic Trading Group. Silver is actually looking even more attractive than gold right now, and at least at this point, they're not keeping careful watch on who's buying silver. And another little reminder, because this actually came up in conversation with some people we were talking about yesterday, a good thing to do for you preppers is to go out and buy what's called the junk silver coins. This means the pre-1965, 1964 coins that were still being made of silver for the quarters and dimes and real nickel for the nickel and real solid copper for the pennies. And by the term junk, it means don't buy coins with numismatic collector value, because that sort of value just comes and goes as a matter of fashion. You want coins at close to the melt value, because it's a way of owning physical silver. And when the U.S. economy implodes, you're going to have these nice, uniform silver tokens of known value, uniform value, that will work very well in terms of supporting commerce among the people until a new government can be formed with a state-issued value-based currency to get our nation back together. So that's a good way to go. Meanwhile, interesting little report. We were talking yesterday about the disconnect between the claim that there was a housing surge and all of these mortgage companies laying thousands and thousands of people off because nobody was refinancing their mortgages or even applying for new mortgages. The story being that the money junkies were taking their ill-gotten gains and buying foreclosed houses for cash in order to turn around and turn them into rental properties, meaning the end of private home ownership in America and a return to feudalism. Now we're getting a story out of MarketWatch that new U.S. home sales dropped to 394,000 in July, and it was supposed to be expected at considerably higher than that. It dropped 13%. So this so-called housing boom you've been hearing in the corporate media, it doesn't exist. The numbers don't support it. The numbers are going down. Over at This Is Money in Great Britain, they're now looking at a third bailout for Greece. Now, the reason for all these bailouts, to keep Greece ticking along, all comes back to those credit default swaps sold by Wall Street against Europe's debt. $90 trillion worth of those estimated credit default swaps, which will start coming due when any nations break free of the Eurozone, go back to their own currency, or default on their debts. This is why the U.S. Federal Reserve has been sending tons and tons of money to Europe to keep those banks solvent, so they don't have to pay on the credit default swaps. Because credit default swaps are not regulated. They oppose regulation. They oppose any kind of control. Now, a credit default swap is like an insurance policy. And regular insurance is, in fact, regulated. I can buy a fire insurance policy on my own home, but I cannot buy a fire insurance policy on my neighbor's home. Obviously, that would give me a motive to sneak over there with a can of gasoline and a road flare late at night. So you're not allowed to insure assets you do not own under the regular insurance laws. And under those same laws, insurance companies are required to keep cash reserves on hand to pay a reasonable expected number of claims coming in, which seems to make a lot of common sense. But credit default swaps are not regulated. If I go out and I invest $10 million in consolidated lint, I can buy a credit default swap that if Consolidated Lint goes out of business, I will get at least some of my money back. If my neighbor invests $10 million in Consolidated Lint, I can buy a credit default swap that says if Consolidated Lint goes out of business with his money, I can get a return on that. I'm allowed to buy this insurance on assets I do not actually own. And because it's unregulated, these companies that sell these credit default swaps don't keep cash reserves. That's what happened to AIG. They were getting rich and putting the money in their pocket, selling credit default swaps against all those mortgage-backed securities back in 2008, most of which turned out to be completely fraudulent. And when that fraud imploded, AIG did not have the money to pay off on the credit default swaps, and they collapsed. And the same is true of Wall Street as a whole on those credit default swaps they have sold against Europe's debt. And that is why American money taken from the American taxpayer is being poured all over the banks of Europe to keep them in the black, or at least looking like they're in the black, so those credit default swaps will not come due. So now they're talking about a third bailout for Greece. They're now saying it's inevitable, because the austerity program did not work. And remember, there was that story that the whole spreadsheet model for how austerity was going to save the economy turned out to be flawed. And even without that spreadsheet, we knew the idea wasn't going to work, because the idea was the government cuts spending, lets all those public workers go, and then because they're not spending as much money, they'll balance the books. The problem being that all those public workers that were let go did not have private sector jobs to go to. So social assistance costs went up, tax revenues went down, Greece needed a second bailout, now they're coming in with a third bailout. All of Europe is like a boat sitting in the water, and there are 10 holes in the bottom of that boat, and they've only got 9 corks, and everything that they do basically comes down to yanking a cork from one hole, pounding it into the other hole, in full view of the media cameras, screaming, "I'm working to solve the problem," but still the water comes in and still it is sinking. What they've been doing for all these years does not work, so of course they're going to go on doing more of it. By the way, interesting story out of Sense on Sense. Wall Street criminal referrals have declined 96%. In 1995, bank regulators made 1,837 criminal referrals to the Justice Department for banker Wall Street investor fraud. From 2007 to 2010, the average number of annual referrals was 72. In other words, it is now a policy of the government never to investigate bank fraud, never to investigate investment house fraud. And remember, we had that magazine interview earlier in the year where 25% of the people working on Wall Street said, yeah, fraud's a reality. Fraud's the only way we can stay in business. They're openly admitting to fraud, and the government refuses to arrest and prosecute them. But by golly, if you're smoking a marijuana cigarette there, they're going to throw you into prison in California as fast as they can, or anywhere in the country. White-collar crime takes hundreds of times more wealth from the American people than street crime, but only the street criminals go to prison. We'll be back after Phyllis Shapley and America. Welcome back to the show. And I got an email here reminding us that before the silver was taken out of our coinage, there were also solid silver half dollars and even silver dollars, which are so worn down they're not of any numismatic value, but you can still get them at the melt value, and that's something to definitely put in your prepper kit. And don't worry about trying to calculate weight and convert to the Federal Reserve note, because that's going to be gone following the crash. So you'll just say, this is the face value. You need a gallon of gasoline, 25 cents, which, by the way, before they took the silver out of our money, that's what a gallon of gasoline costs, 25 cents. So you'll go to the gas station, you'll buy 4 gallons of gas, and you put 4 silver quarters on the counter, and you're done. It's a good way to invest in hard physical silver without attracting too much attention from the evil ones, the money junkies. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Dan the Man is sitting in our control room for this Friday afternoon, ready to answer the call when you call on in. Now, getting back to the economy. And we're seeing, Greece needs a new bailout. We're seeing all this massive fraud, but prosecution of bankers for fraud is just completely collapsed here. The Cato Institute has issued a new report saying that poor Americans have it too good. That those gosh darn Americans, they're living high on the hog on public benefits, and really, if we want to cut government spending, we have to slash those social programs and all that out-of-control Social Security spending. That's the attitude coming out of Washington, D.C. They're not going to fix the problem. They're not going to curb the fraud on Wall Street. They're just going to cover the losses by transferring the losses onto the American people, and that is fascism. That's where we are today. America is no longer a capitalist society. We have gone right off the cliff deep into fascism. The Cato industry is out there trying to, come up with scholarly sounding articles about why, it's okay to short the American worker on their Social Security money because we, the government, can't afford that any longer. Except to remember that the Social Security funds are supposed to be separate. It's not the government's money, it's your money. There is a separate item on your paycheck stub for money taken out of every one of your paychecks that goes into a separate trust fund that is supposed to be invested to generate a return to provide for your retirement. And starting in the Clinton administration, the federal government balanced its books by taking that cash buildup for the baby boomer retirements, which are happening now. And they moved it over to the general ledger, and they spent it as general revenues, and they put a whole bunch of treasury bonds into the Social Security Trust Fund, which they can't redeem. There is a treasury bond bubble out there. That's why China's refusing to buy anymore. They're trying to sell their treasury bonds. They want to get out because they understand the treasury bond bubble is gigantic. And there are not enough living Americans, even with all the amnestied illegals, to ever make good on all those treasury bonds. And that is what is in your Social Security fund right now, a bunch of unredeemable, worthless paper treasury bonds that will never be made good on. And that's why places like the Cato Institute are coming out there and saying, oh, really, we can't afford to pay the Americans. They're living high on the hog. No, they're not. Today's the day when Claire and I go out and we do our thing for the local food distribution program. And the crowds keep getting larger and younger, and I can tell you that these people are not living high on the hog. They are just barely surviving. And yes, there is a tiny percentage that try and take advantage of the system. But the vast majority of the people who are in those food lines, they are you and me, people who spent their lives playing by the rules, filling out the forms, paying the fees and taxes, doing everything this society told them they had to do, getting an education, building a business, and it was all taken away from them by the money junkies who are incapable of admitting error or wrongdoing. We've seen addicts before justifying their existence. I can quit anytime I want. Why don't you quit? I don't want to. That they'll just concoct all kinds of fantasies to go on saying, this is not a problem, I'm just enjoying life, and I enjoy getting high on other people's money. And they are oblivious, completely oblivious to the harm that is happening around them. And if somebody stands up and says, look at the damage you're doing, oh, it's got to be somebody else's fault. Really, it's all those American workers that, they shouldn't have bought this, they shouldn't have bought that, they shouldn't have gotten the mortgage. Blame the victim. It's classic addictive addict behavior. Blame the victim. I had to mug you because you wouldn't give me the money for my next drug fix. And that's really what we're dealing with. Money is addictive. If you have an addictive personality, you should never start drinking, you should never start smoking, you should never start doing drugs, and you should never be a banker. Cato Institute is now out there on this whole, we've got to blame the victims. Really, as much as we've impoverished those American people, life is still too good for them. We've got to take even more away from them. That's the sales pitch we hear from Wall Street and Washington, D.C. time and time again. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. Now, yesterday we were talking about this very strange blip that hit the NASDAQ and shut off trading for most of the rest of the day. And we pointed out that there were huge spikes in the volume indicators for all three of the markets, NASDAQ, S&P, Dow. The official story was there was a technical difficulty. Now they're pointing fingers saying there was a mistake over at Apple stock or something like that. Over in Europe, this is in the Daily Mail, they're asking the key question, was it a hacking attack? Because the technical difficulties that caused the problem seem to involve a huge amount of packet traffic hitting the networks all at the same time, a denial of service attack, trying to lock it up. And remember, we have been warning that at the point where the U.S. economy is going to implode, in order to duck the blame for having created this monstrous disaster, Wall Street and Washington, D.C. could very easily crash their own financial computers and try and blame those evil Syrian hackers, because that's who we're trying to start a war with this week. It's the Syrian hackers. Last week it was the Chinese hackers, and the week before it was the Iranian hackers. Now it's the Syrian hackers. Gosh darn it, we were just on the verge of turning this economy around, and those dastardly hackers, they came in and smashed it all. So instead of the crash being the result of decades of government corruption and Wall Street fraud and greed, now it's an enemy attack. It's an act of war. And we call that scenario the virtual 9/11. And some commentators were looking at what happened at NASDAQ and the Dow and the S&P yesterday and are saying they've seen this same pattern of interference before. Like somebody is sending a warning for the U.S. to start cleaning its own financial house, or they'll bring it down, or maybe it's just whoever's planning the virtual 9/11 is running some testing. Let's see if we can glitch the market, and that will validate that we have the ability to just take it all down when the president orders the virtual 9/11. Because remember, as a class of human beings, these money junkies and these politicians will never admit error. They will never accept responsibility for their crimes and mistakes. They'll find a scapegoat, and if they can't find a scapegoat, they'll create one out of thin air. Emmanuel Goldstein, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. Now, we've been talking lately about the fracking industry. It's a boom time all across the country. It's causing all kinds of problems. If you have not seen the documentary on HBO, Gasland Part 2, you need to take a look at that. And it looks like, because of all the problems that are surfacing with contaminated groundwater, that the fracking boom is already starting to bust. More about that when we come back. America, welcome back to the show. We're talking about fracking. I know we've got some callers waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you here in just a second here. The problem with fracking, this really took off a few years ago, and there are literally tens of thousands of these fracking wells all across the United States. And the idea is that they would drill way down to the ground into this shale that contains petroleum, or actually natural gas, and they would pump down this highly toxic sludge of chemicals, some of which are used in biological weapons, I might add. And they would pump it down there under pressure to literally crack the rocks, to free the natural gas, and then suck it back up and use it for the energy market. And I noticed that this fracking boom really took off pretty much after the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. And I think the reasoning was that the U.S. government understands when they declare war on Iran, it is going to severely disrupt global oil supplies. And so the idea was they were going to risk drilling down into these very deep, very high-pressure oil reserves under the Gulf of Mexico in order to bring that well online as quickly as possible. This is probably why the Minerals Management Service wasn't paying careful attention to safety operations out there on the Deepwater Horizon. And they were going to bring that online so they could tell the rest of the world, we can go ahead and invade Iran now because we've got enough oil to cover the shortfall. Only that didn't work. And then we have this fracking all across the country. And it has just triggered this incredible firestorm of public protests from people living in communities near these wells whose water supply is now contaminated. They're talking about major droughts out in Texas, and the problem isn't the absence of water, it's the absence of clean, uncontaminated water. And the lawsuits are piling up, the public opposition is piling up, and the return they're getting from these gas wells isn't as high as they thought it was going to be because they're built so poorly they're leaking. That's why all this stuff is in the groundwater. If you go and look at these wells, and they show some of them in that Gasland documentary, the methane is just bubbling up like crazy into the atmosphere. It's probably the reason for all these strange fish die-offs we've been seeing in lakes and streams and rivers where the official story is, oh, there was no oxygen in the water, without explanation. Well, the explanation is simple. If you have methane gas bubbling into water encountering free oxygen, the methane decomposes into more water molecules plus CO2. So there's no free oxygen left in the water, and the fish die and float to the surface. A lot of people in fracking areas are noticing there don't seem to be a lot of birds anymore. Because birds' high metabolism, they succumb to methane toxicity faster than us larger mammals. And so the costs of this whole thing are piling up. It's a major, major boondoggle. And again, it's a reminder that as in service to the almighty dollar, this government is completely oblivious to the health consequences. As long as it makes money, as long as it meets the strategic need. By the way, interesting coming on that Cato report, Obama just made a statement to the effect, there's a new budget crisis. Boehner's trying to find a way to keep the federal government running to the end of the year because it's already run out of money. We already know they're lying about having exceeded the officially mandated congressional debt ceiling because the Treasury Department has kept the U.S. government's debt hovering just below that level for going on 2 months. And Obama is warning there will be more cuts to public spending. Well, I got some place you could save a whole lot of money. Shut down this department of let's invade somebody else's country and steal their oil. Let's shut down this massive NSA spying operation that is costing billions and billions of dollars. Have you noticed that the U.S. government, as it gets into financial trouble, raises taxes, and they cut spending on those things we, the people, wanted to pay taxes for? good roads, good bridges, good schools, good hospitals. All the stuff we, the people, want in exchange for our tax money is the first thing to get that budget axe. And the things we don't approve of, like invading Syria, oh, they get all the money they need. All righty, we're going to grab some phone calls here. Kit in San Diego. Aloha, Kit. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing well. I'm very angry about what's going on right now.
I know we all are. We all are. I wanted to talk to you about the NSA spying.
Yes.
I had an idea. A couple of friends and I were talking about it, and the conclusion we came to is that the only freedom is total freedom. And what we mean by that is, what would happen if everybody removed all the passwords from the Wi-Fi, and like I do, when I walk the dog at night, go around and find ones that are password-free, and go hit websites like yours, and just confuse the heck out of everyone you meet. Ask for their phone number, call them, just throw them off the trail, just confuse the heck out of them so they have nothing to do with it.
Let me just step in here right now. First of all, I'm not going to encourage anybody to go and pirate other people's Wi-Fi, and if you have Wi-Fi and you don't have security and a password on it, you are being a fool. As far as the NSA is concerned, I think at this point we can assume that all of the commercial consumer routers used in your home already have a backdoor built in, so I don't know that it's really going to accomplish much of anything at all. I think what we need to do is start adopting private encryption for those who have their own servers. Set up your own mail server system running peer-to-peer. Do anything you can to protect your private data against a government with a long history of stealing your business secrets for their own personal profit. But in the end, because the NSA is not complying with the authorities regarding what they can and cannot do, we have to take away the ability. And the only way the American people will know for a fact they are not being spied on any longer, or the people of planet Earth are going to know that for a fact, is for all these data centers across the globe to be shut down, the computers torn out and sold as surplus, and the buildings turned into public housing or something. Because short of that, we can't believe anything this government says about trying to get the NSA spying under control. They clearly have gone outside the box of the Constitution, and clearly they have no desire to go back. And my opinion is simply this, that Constitution is the contract under which we the people allow you to manage this nation for the nation and we the people. And if you don't want to play by the rules, have the decency to resign. Anything else, Kit?
No, just a thought.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Obi in Colorado. Aloha, Obi. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I wanted to mention something about the fracking. I worked in the oil industry for 15 years, from 1984 until 1999. And what happened is a lot of the oil companies made deals with chemical companies because the chemical companies were having trouble with the EPA and, dumping their waste. So the oil companies made deals with them to pump all this stuff down into old wells to get rid of it, and they were getting paid for it. Now they're using it for fracking. They were actually doing fracking in the mid-'80s, because I worked in a production logging company where we were, doing logging on fracking wells. They're doing more of it now because now oil is quite a bit more per barrel.
Well, the fracking is mostly about getting, I know they can frack for oil itself. The problem with that is the oil comes up contaminated with the fracking chemicals, whereas the natural gas will bubble up and be separate in theory. It's not really working out all that well. But I looked at, one of the list of chemicals that goes in the fracking fluid, and I kept wondering, why is this here? Because it didn't make sense. It wasn't dissolving rock. It wasn't particularly efficacious in the process, but they were all highly toxic waste, industrial waste products, and now that makes perfect sense. The whole big push for fluoridation of the water supply was being driven by the fact that uranium enrichment for nuclear weapons development was piling up this huge, highly toxic buildup of the fluoride left over from the uranium hexafluoride feedstock for uranium enrichment. And I guess the idea was, well, we'll just spread it all across the country, we'll put it in toothpaste and water, and that way there's no one big pile causing problems. And it doesn't surprise me at all to find out that much of the chemicals in those fracking fluids are just toxic waste that they're trying to get rid of by shoving it down into the ground. The problem being it doesn't stay there. Okay,
but I actually remember seeing wells and hundreds of barrels of these chemicals from trucks from other companies, and they were preparing to pump this stuff down into the wells.
I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Obi. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I would like to basically set out for you what I think is the biggest single malfeasance, if not outright crime, committed by the United States government against the American people, going back to the Wall Street mortgage-backed security fraud of 2008. First and foremost, they should have grabbed those fraudsters and thrown them in prison. And they didn't. They bailed them out at taxpayer expense. And we have heard all kinds of figures about just how much it cost the people of the American nation. There was TARP, all these other bailouts. Remember when the Federal Reserve was just pouring the money out of the back window of the Federal Reserve, and they said, we don't have to tell you who's getting the money and how much. And all of it technically a loan against future generations of American taxpayers. One estimate that was being repeated by people in the know was that the total cost to the nation's economy of propping up Wall Street from their fraud ran to $40 trillion with a T. Now, just for a moment, stop and think what the government could have done for the people of the United States with $40 trillion. For one thing, they could have built thorium cycle reactors in 30 American cities, reducing the need for oil and gas, so we wouldn't have to be invading other countries to control their oil or fracking and toxifying our own nation's water supply to keep the energy coffers filled. And by the way, even if fracking goes bust and shuts down, the damage is done. Those chemicals are in the ground and in the groundwater, and it will be decades, if not centuries, before they are gone. They pumped all of this toxic stuff down there. According to that last caller, they're literally taking toxic chemical waste and paying the oil companies to just shove it down those wells to get it out of sight. And once it's down there, you don't get it back up. It's more money junkie thinking. I just got to solve the problem right now and get my paycheck and my retirement, and I'm off to the Cayman Islands, and if future generations are dealing with cancer and no drinking water. I'm sure Nestle's as happy as all get out, because their attitude from their CEO is that access to fresh water is not a natural human right. Water is something to be commoditized and sold as a product in exchange for money. I'm sure Nestle's already thinking about commoditizing air. If you want to breathe, you have to pay for your air, because we own the air. We own the planet's atmosphere. And if you have to pay a breathing tax. That's how silly all this stuff is getting. That $40 trillion certainly could have been used to alleviate hunger, could have been used to keep the roads repaired, the rails repaired, the bridges repaired. This government has been taking money from the American people and spending it everywhere but on the American people. And this is why our roads are crumbling, our bridges are collapsing, trains are derailing, our nuclear power plants are all having problems. They're not being maintained because the flow of money is from you, the taxpayer, into the government, and from the government to the money junkies. That is fascism. The proper function of all government is to do for the community what the community needs but cannot do for themselves on an individual basis. That is the only legitimate function of government, and our government has abandoned that. They're not taking care of the community at all. This is why the Securities Exchange Commission sat on their butts watching internet porn for 12 years while Bernie Madoff cheated his investors for $65 billion. This is why the Minerals Management Service just sat there on their butts watching internet porn while the Deepwater Horizon was using a manual blowout preventer that was 4 years overdue for preventative maintenance, and when it was actually needed, failed to operate correctly. They're reaping in huge amounts of money in those federal paychecks, and they're asleep at the switch. So, I'm angry today. I think you're angry today. I'm disgusted. I've never been so ashamed to be an American as I am right now, watching what they're doing over there in Syria. The lie about this chemical weapons attack is so blatant and obvious. And what we're hearing out of the corporate media in Washington, D.C. is, oh, yes, we believe it. Absolutely, we believe this is true, and we're going to go and throw your children onto the war there. By the way, a little side note. I ran one of my What Really Happened polls, and the question was very simple. Do you support a U.S. invasion of Syria? And looking at the numbers, 97% of the respondents said no, and we had 19 whole votes who said, yes, I support a U.S. invasion of Syria. Could you be any more obvious you're some kind of a government spook monitoring the website? So, right underneath the poll, I posted a link to the official enlistment form for the U.S. military services. You can download that form and fill it out, mail it back into me, and there's a whole bunch of military recruiters just down here at the bottom of the hill, and I'd be happy to drop these forms off on my way to run errands this afternoon. And so here is a message to those 19 people who voted yes on do you support a U.S. invasion of Syria. Let's see you walk your talk. Fill out the form, send it in to me. Because if you think this war is a good idea, please go over there. Here's your parachute, here's your rifle, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit, get on the transport and go. But I am really sick and tired of all these people who sit in their corporate media offices or ensconced in luxury in Washington, D.C., screaming that we have to send our children to the other side of the world to attack and kill a bunch of people who've not actually done anything to the United States of America. Syria has done nothing to the United States of America. Neither has Iran. Neither did Iraq. Neither did Afghanistan. I grew up, because I'm a baby boomer. Next week is my 61st birthday. I grew up in the immediate aftermath of the devastation of World War II. And when I say devastation, I mean the fact that it doesn't really matter whether you win or lose these wars. The people at the very top, they'll count victory and put up plaques and flags and medals and say this side won and this side lost. But for ordinary people, everybody loses. Everybody lost family members. Everybody had their personal financial well-being destroyed when they lost husbands or other breadwinners. And I grew up hearing about the horrors of all this war and kept thinking, how could the German people or the Italian people or the Japanese get suckered into doing something that insane? And now I'm learning firsthand how these governments sell these wars. All wars are started with lies and deception. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, all wars based on deception. And what he means by that is, throughout all of history, without exception, any ruler who wanted to start a war has to lie and trick his people into it. Because war is a very ugly, dangerous, ill-paying business. Nobody wants to go to war unless they have been convinced there is no other choice. And looking at the Constitution of the United States of America, I have concluded that the highest of all possible high crimes and misdemeanors committed by our rulers is when they lie to the people of the nation in order to start a war, as they are doing right here, right now, today. You know, there's already a bill sitting in committee in Congress to restart the draft. Young people are already having to register for the draft. It's already been ongoing. Young men and young women. They're talking about drafting women into combat roles. And I know the feminists like to say women should be able to serve in combat if they so choose, and yeah, if they do, that's fine. But this is talk about mandatory conscription of our children for more wars. Men and women. For what? For what? What has Syria done to the United States of America that justifies a military invasion? What has Iran done to the United States that justifies a military intervention? What did Iraq do? The answer is nothing. The United States is the new axis of evil. We're the new Nazi fascist power spreading tentacles across the globe. We'll be back after these commercials. Welcome back to the last segment of our Friday show, heading into the weekend, and I hope we can sort of calm down and relax over the weekend. It's probably going to be very difficult. But for the weekend, I need to put out a call to Rivero's Rangers. And I'm sorry we don't have badges or patches yet. We can't afford them. But I need all of you. This is a call to keyboards. Don't wait for orders. Just grab your keyboards and ride toward the sound of government bovine excrement here. And I'm talking specifically about this excuse for war with Syria. And again, looking at the corporate media, that yesterday was all about chemical attack must go to war against Syria. Today, they've pulled way back. It's all about Fort Hood shooting, resignation of the mayor of San Diego, Kim Kardashian's new baby, and all the rest of this other connotation, which tells us they understand the American people aren't buying this nonsense about Syria. But the online propagandists, who are probably the only segment of the American population that still have decent full-time jobs, they're out there still trying to push this nonsense. They're trying to figure some way to convince America that, yes, Assad used poison gas on his own people in his own country, and we should invade because of that, which is kind of like saying that because... Okay, we seem to have lost our connection to RBN. Are we still connected? Dan, are we still connected? Hello, Dan. Are we still there?
Yes, we are. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I guess the NSA doesn't like what I'm saying, but this would be kind of like... Okay, the whole story coming out of Washington, D.C. is that because Assad used poison gas on women and children in Damascus, that we should invade and conquer them. This is like Great Britain saying that because the U.S. government used poison gas on those women and children in that church in Waco, Texas, that Great Britain should invade the United States of America. That is how completely nonsensical this cover story is. But as you go out there and you prowl the social media, the online blogs, everywhere that you go, and somebody is saying we've got to invade Syria because of what Assad did, you need to ask two questions. Do you really think Assad is stupid enough to launch a chemical weapons attack just as the UN chemical weapons inspectors finally arrive in Syria at his invitation? And two, if Assad was stupid enough to launch a chemical weapons attack with the UN inspectors there, why would he target women and children as opposed to targeting the hired mercenary army? That is how transparent this latest government lie really is. And normally we would laugh at the stupidity of it all, except that our young men and young women are at risk of being killed and crippled if this lie is allowed to stand. So I need all of you to take time this weekend, go out on the blogs, on the corporate media websites, and anywhere that you see this push for war in Syria going on, you have to take a stand. We all have to stand up and tell the government, you are liars, we do not believe anything that you say anymore. And you will get no more of our support for wars. You will not get our money, you will not get our salute, you will not get our children first and foremost. No more wars for the bankers. Wall Street and the government screwed up this nation, and we're not going to let them try and solve the mess with another world war like they did in World War I and World War II. Because it's a repeating, tragic pattern that has to stop. Crash of 1907, get out of it with World War I. Crash of 1929, get out of it with World War II. Crash of 2008, and look how hard they are pushing to send your children off to horrible death, just so they can have black ink at the bottom of those Wall Street ledgers. Now, I don't know you. I don't know your children. But I'm telling you right now, it's an absolute conviction that the lives of your children are worth far more than pieces of paper with ink on them. And you have to accept that as well and be willing to take a stand on that principle. No more dead American children to prop up a failed banking system. Enough is enough is enough. All righty. One more comment here, and again, this is a plug for the Republic Trading Group. Gold is heading up. Silver is heading up. It is still a good time to buy in. Wall Street went to great lengths to try and crush the physical prices down, to keep people in the stock market, to keep people with their money in their savings accounts. And common sense, especially after what happened in Cyprus, common sense is you should have only as much money in the bank as it takes to cover your immediate obligations, keep the rest at home under your own control, and put some of it into physical silver and physical gold. And you can go to Republic Trading Group, and if you buy your silver and gold from them, part of the proceeds of that sale go to support Republic Broadcasting. And we need your help. I cannot stress how important it is right now. We don't get big fat checks from companies like Monsanto or the fracking industry or big pharmaceutical companies. We don't get those big glitzy ads because we're out here telling you what you need to know to make good choices. Republic Broadcasting really is the Republic's broadcasting network. It's the voice of the people telling you what you need to hear, what you need to know about what's going on. And we rely on your support, both financially and for you to call your local AM and FM affiliates and say, we want to hear this programming on your radio so I can listen to what's going on at Republic Broadcasting when I walk away from my computer at home. I want to hear it on my car radio. I want to hear John Stedmiller just coming out of my surround sound car FM radio. And it only works if you step up and take part. We're in a fight to stop a fight. Right now, this moment in history. We can see clearly the lies being fed to us by the corporate media to try and launch war in Syria. And you can't sit this one out. There are no innocent bystanders on this one. You're either going to stand up there and help us halt this war dead in its tracks, or we're going to see a lot more of our young people coming back in those cheap metal boxes, draped with a flag and a little plastic military decoration. They don't even use metal in those things anymore. Yes, we're sorry we blew your kid to bloody bits, but it was worth it. The bankers love you, and here's a little decoration ribbon thing you can hang on the wall in place of your child. It really is enough, enough, enough. All right, I've harangued you enough about your support. It is a call to keyboards. I need your help. Oh, boy, here it goes again. I think the NSA is trying to break us in here. Okay, looks like we're back right now. I think those gosh darn hackers don't like what I'm saying on the radio today very much here. A little piece of fluff story before we end our Friday program here. There's a major fire. Okay. I guess somebody's expressing their ire. Okay, are we back online? Dan, are we there? Okay, well, I'm just going to finish the show here on BAM User because apparently somebody has decided I should not be longer. Okay. All right, so over by Yosemite, there's a major fire. Brush fire. It's going completely out of control, and it's a tragedy. My wife and I have got very fond memories of Yosemite. And no doubt the global warming, carbon Nazis are going to say it's global warming causing the heat and the fire, and I would not be surprised to see them revive that old idea that terrorists are running around the country setting fires. But we know what's going on. Under all this austerity, under all this budget cuts, funding for brush control and fire prevention has been slashed. And so the nation is burning while the Wall Street money junkies keep raking in their taxpayer-funded bailouts. They have abandoned even the pretext of caring for the nation and its people. It's just the cash grab is on. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation. And the looting is just happening right in front of you. By the way, apparently down in Richmond they had one of the Bloomberg anti-gun rallies. Only 15 people showed up. So the gun grabbers are running into a great deal of resistance there. The New York City Council has overturned Bloomberg's veto on the stop and frisk decision. So it's continuing to go back and forth. But it is the stop and frisk of random people is a violation of the Constitution. Okay, let's see. Another scandal involving Syngenta, one of the companies that put out GMO products. And apparently they've been caught covering up the death of animals used in testing of their GMO products. in particular their GM BT corn. It turns out it actually kills livestock being fed it. They covered it up so they could sell it out to farmers. Now those farmers' livestock are dying. But it makes a buck, makes a profit. That makes it really okay. Alrighty, and we're coming up here on the end of the show. I presume that if we were still connected to Republic Broadcasting, we'd be hearing the music playing now, so I'm going to basically begin my sign-off. And again, for those of you listening to this program, I need you more than I've ever needed you before. I know I ask a lot from you, but I really need you to get out there on those keyboards and just get out there and stand up to this lie about chemical weapons in Syria. I really, really do. So we're going to sign off here and basically have a good weekend. Stay safe. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Stay skeptical, stay angry, stay informed, make good choices, and aloha, America.